Good
We are
morning.
live.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everybody. I want to say thank you for joining us and welcome to High Speed Rail's webinar this morning on the 2020 Sustainability Report. My name is Alice Rodriguez. I'm the Deputy Director of External Affairs. In a bit, we're going to have a presentation from our sustainability and planning team members. But before we go through that, I want to kind of give you a little agenda. So once we go through that presentation, what we're going to do is do a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, we'd like you to use the chat feature in the Zoom platform, and then I'll be able to see those questions and then ask them to the team as we go along through that. I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start off with you, Meg.
Hi, good morning. I'm Meg Cederoth. I'm the Director of Planning and Sustainability for the California High Speed Rail program.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nagar Khalili. I work as an air quality analyst on California High Speed Rail project.
Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Advait Mohale. I help out on the corporate sustainability advisory work with the California High Speed Rail Authority. Great.
Thank you to all three of you. Meg, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. You know, I work here at the Authority. I know a little bit about a lot of different topics. I love learning more about the sustainability work that we're doing, what we're doing in that space. And so I figured there might be other members of the audience that have similar questions that I have, just as kind of a non-technical, like layperson that I am. And so I wanted to ask, why does the Authority compile this annual report? I know the team puts in a lot of work to build this very thorough, comprehensive report on all things sustainability.
Well, that is a great question. I think it's really rooted in California and the philosophy of sustainability as a whole to focus on transparency. And it's an important value of the Authority to be very transparent about what we're doing. It's also a respect for the fact that this is a very large program, which is composed of mega projects. And so the information about what's happening relative to all the different values and activities we have going on is important to convey to our stakeholders every year. And we've come to respect that, you know, just summing up what's happening relative to sustainability is a large undertaking, but important to do so that our stakeholders do have information that they can rely on and value. And then from a very nuts and bolts standpoint, it's a little bit like taking our vitamins every year. It's an opportunity for us to look at the data and see what it's telling us about our performance. It's a moment for us as a team to sit down and see what the trends are, what hotspots we might be seeing over time. You know, we do a very monthly focused look at all of our data coming in from the project, but this annual activity allows us to look at trends over time and understand where we can start to, that data helps us to then reshape and retool our policy to be moving towards ever better performance.
It makes a lot of sense. So transparency, accountability, making sure we're staying at the forefront of all things sustainable. I love it.
Yeah.
I have one more question. It really was just born out of curiosity. We have in the title this year, the 2020 Sustainability Report, Building Resilience. Of course, I know what those words mean, but what does that mean in the context of our sustainability program or policy?
Right. Well, I think it's very much a, you know, resilience from a climate standpoint, I think has been at the forefront of many of us in California, right, as we sort of recognize we're living in a new climate reality. But not just resilience from that perspective. We as an organization under the leadership of CEO Brian Kelly and our COO Joe Hedges have focused on building an organization that is able to learn from some of the past mistakes or maybe things that have not gone well on the project and have retooled that to be focused on ever improving the organization as a whole. So it's a little bit about the organization's resilience, but then we also recognize that how the system fits into the greater activities involved in California also helps our communities to start building resilience. When we're connecting the Central Valley cities with Silicon Valley and Southern California and the Inland Empire, we'll start to see a lot more diversity in terms of the economy for these places. And so it's about looking at how the system can be used to build community resilience as well.
It's complex, more than I was expecting. Well, it's a lot of fronts, in other words.
Right,
That makes
right.
a lot of sense. So thank you for that. And I hope that maybe it answered some questions for some of our audience members. What I'd like to do now is have you hand it over to you to go through your presentation. I just want to remind folks before we do that if you do have a question for us, please feel free. You don't need to wait to the end. Go ahead and throw that up into the chat box, and then I'll be able to moderate the Q&A session after the presentation is over.
Perfect.
All right, let's go and have your slideshow come up.
Great. So good morning to everyone who's joined us on this webinar today. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to sit down with us virtually to go through some of this information. And we're excited to hear about what some of your questions are relative to this data. So on the next slide, the team today is going to walk through a couple of different points and highlights of the sustainability report. It's a very dense, rich report that focuses on indicators across a broad range of activity. And that's a reflection of really, this is a project being built in California. And California is a national leader in considering how we evolve our industry, our economy, and our transportation in a way that enhances and maintains the quality of life for people in this, fifth largest economy in the world. And it's the future home of millions of more residents. So in 2008 with Prop 1A, the citizens of California really voted to move our existing and future population and to deliver that mobility that's necessary to maintain our economy in a way that wouldn't damage the environment. So the high-speed rail system establishes a backbone statewide of electrified transportation and transforms interregional travel in this state, delivering the redundancy and the resiliency in our transportation network. And for these reasons, it's been included in California's legislatively mandated and very bold plans to both mitigate climate change through reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to our changing climate. So on the next slide.
Meg, let me interrupt you, sorry, for just a second. Our administrator reminded me that the questions should go in the Q&A feature of Zoom, not the chat. So apologies for that. If you move your mouse over the Zoom platform, you'll see a Q&A section. Go ahead and click on that for any questions. Sorry about that.
Great.
Meg.
No, we're excited for the questions. I'm glad. Yeah. That's good. You know, so for given that background of the authority, since 2013, we've had a policy to deliver the high-speed rail system while setting a model for sustainable rail infrastructure. This is up on the screen, our policy commitment. And in reading through it, you can understand that our approach to sustainability is comprehensive across all aspects of the program and its phases. So this annual report, as specified in our policy, is a very valuable opportunity to provide a diverse array of stakeholders, folks on the phone, folks internal to the authority, and others, with very detailed progress against the environmental and the social and economic indicators. And on the next slide, this sustainability policy aggregates all of the different commitments and approaches to that comprise sustainability that have really been in place since the beginning of this phase of delivering high-speed rail. In 2008, our board adopted 100% goal to operate the system on 100% renewable energy. This was the first time any rail organization had made such a commitment. So at the time, it was very public policy leading and very industry leading. Since then, we've actually seen a number of other systems recognize the value that renewable energy can play in terms of reducing cost and improving resilience when linked with things like battery storage. But not stopping there, you know, the board has had a very robust focus on how we can use the delivery of the system to provide value back to California as soon as possible. So in practical terms, the authority implemented several public policy leading practice to honor its commitment to delivering this transformative project in a truly green way, including net zero direct greenhouse gas emissions for construction and net zero air quality emissions for construction as well. And this is an important goal for us because it means that we then focus our practices on reducing emissions as much as possible. And so that's led us to proactive construction requirements for all of our contractors, including requiring Tier 4 vehicles and including requiring things like 100% recycling for concrete and steel. And Nagar will be digging into our Tier 4, the results of our Tier 4 activities a little bit later in the presentation. We've had a policy since 2013, but in addition to that policy, we've also focused on how we can use the requirements of construction to start bringing a lot more transparency to the materials that we're using to construct the program. So we were the first infrastructure project to require disclosure on major materials. We required, this is very inside baseball, we required environmental product declarations for concrete and steel for our major contractor in 2014. And we're now starting to have the benefit of that data and information, and that helps us to then look at ways and policy levers and practice levers we can push in order to still further improve the environmental quality of the materials that we're using. I think another signature area where we are looking at the project as a way to move the needle on construction practices is that we've again set some performance targets for major materials in the construction. And we've identified a way to use a carbon target to be to reduce the amount of carbon emissions produced from construction. So on the next slide, as I said, this is a very dense report and it does cover a broad set of indicators. Advait is going to dig into a little bit more about that idea of transparency and how we developed this indicator set. But this slide gives you a good slice of some social, some environmental, and some economic indicators that express what's happening or the progress to date on the project. As I said, we focused on ways that not only can we reduce the amount of emissions produced in construction, but we've worked with partners and invested in projects that also deliver either sequestered or avoided greenhouse gas emissions. And from an environmental standpoint, we've also our requirements have been reducing the amount of criteria air pollutants produced in construction. But of nearly equal importance, I'd say, is the focus that we've brought to targeting disadvantaged workers and targeting small businesses. I know, Alice used to work in this area very directly. This is an important focus for the authority so that, jobs and economic activity are coming into vulnerable communities and helping them to weather and withstand some of the, certainly the last economic dip and now the economic troubles we're seeing as a result of the pandemic. So as we've noted through a number of different reports, and as we again report in the sustainability report, we've looked at how the authority's investments have benefited or played a role in disadvantaged communities as well. So these are a suite of indicators and just really a small cross-section of the data that explains sustainability for the program. On the next slide, I'd like to hand it over to Advait to dig into a little more detail about our annual sustainability report and some of the tools we've used to build that up.
Awesome. Thanks, Meg. So on this slide specifically, we wanted to highlight that all the rich work that Meg has been speaking about and that the authority has been doing, even though it is leading edge, to make sure we are transparent and hold ourselves accountable, we make sure that it is reported out in a manner that is comparable. And sort of, it's not just today in 2020 with the report that has come out. It's not just right now that we're doing it. We have been reporting aligned with all of these various standards across the year. And you can see an incremental growth every year, where in 2014, our annual sustainability report was aligned to a particular GRI standard. We'll dig into more and what all of these acronyms mean in the next slide. And eventually we are also, we have improved. And for example, in 2019, right now, we are piloting one of the first Envision verification program as well for the entire authority. On the next slide, we dig into a little bit more on why transparency is very important for the authority. A project this size, which is taking place across the mega regions of California, to make sure that we are providing for information which is comparable with industry aligned metrics. So all of the rich information and the hot topic words that you heard about, climate change, economic metrics, etc., we make sure that the numbers that come out are aligned, first of all, with the Global Reporting Initiative, that's GRI, to make sure that everything is drills down to the definitions which are aligned with industry, are accepted, and have been designed and developed through a very structured peer review process, and incorporating a very large array of stakeholders. Going beyond, once we have that definition sorted out, we have the indicators that we're reporting out on. We also participate and we put ourselves up to be rated by third-party organizations like the GRESB, which is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, which offers us to transparently, represent our performance on a host of criteria across the environmental, social, and governance metrics, where we are rated and against our peers, so against other high-speed rail operations around the world. So last year, for example, we obtained the highest 5-star rating. This year, of course, because of COVID-19, things are delayed a bit, but our provisional scores indicate that we have increased our scores by 11 more points. Similarly, with the Envision rating system as well, where we are able to obtain an industry-leading guidance on not just a particular specific aspect of what's happening today, but going right from the planning, design to an eventual construction phase. We're able to look at the entire project life cycle and have a third party come in and audit and actually see what's happening and whether all of the sustainability talk, so to say, whether we are faithfully representing it on our actions or not. So that's where the transparency comes in. And on the next slide, we will be able to see how our priorities, which tie back and go beyond just the environmental actions, but are aligned with the economic development and governance aspect of not just the authority and making sure we get the money back for what we're putting in, but also provide equitable growth to the Central Valley. The energy and emissions priority speaks very clearly to our priorities to be 100% net neutral and be able to operate without impacting the climate change, without impacting the climate in a negative manner. Another priority is also the natural resources, because while we are building such a big linear infrastructure, we want to make sure that we are protecting, conserving, and mitigating against any negative impacts to the local natural capital resources of California. While we're doing all of this and protecting, and these are all of our impacts that would be external to the organization, external to the authority. The other two priorities are internal, where we are making sure that what we are building, what we are putting on the ground, be it the stations that we're building or the linear infrastructure that we're constructing, are done in a very, very sustainable manner. And we have various metrics against it, as Meg sort of alluded to earlier, talking about the entire life cycle approach, going down to the requirement to have EPDs. After that, we want to make sure that the station communities, that the communities around our stations and the people who are actually going to be using our program, our rail lines eventually, are also taken care of. So our sustainability priorities span the length and breadth of our complete life cycle, so to say. And on the next slide, we would be able to drill a little bit more into the specific aspects, and I'll hand it back over to Meg to talk about the amazing work we're doing.
Great, thank you. we sometimes joke, Advait just got to cover the inside baseball sustainability approach, but I know people are always very curious about sort of why we've chosen different standards and why we're sort of organizing the approach this way. And those set of priorities are kind of as Advait was walking through them, I hope you appreciate, they reflect a very logical set of priorities for us as a rail infrastructure project. So the indicators in this report are a reflection of the work that we've done with a broad set of stakeholders, including many of you on the webinar today. And when we discuss this with stakeholders, what is important for them to be hearing about the project, I'd say in the context of sustainability, what comes back to us is that our impact on jobs, and specifically that positive impact and investment in disadvantaged communities, ranks probably the highest among all of our indicators. It's very close with another indicator that I'll get to in the next slide. But as you'll see in the report, and as I mentioned, 50% of our investment to date, or nearly 2.4 billion, has been in disadvantaged communities. And as our executives have emphasized in a number of their presentations over the past few weeks, we've been consistently increasing the number of workers on our site. Last week there were more than 1,200 workers safely following very safe protocols relative to the pandemic at work delivering the site. And that in aggregate means more than 4,300 jobs. And more than 40% of these workers live in disadvantaged communities where, good paying jobs are a very tangible benefit at any point in time, and particularly now during the pandemic. And then as we look forward to recovery and how we can keep more folks employed in delivering the infrastructure necessary to underpin our economy. On the next slide, you'll see indicator number 2 in terms of importance. The authority, the program receives 25% of the cap and trade funds. And with that, we deliver, more than twice of all the other projects, but very importantly, we deliver a critical kind of base load of emissions reductions for the state of California. And this is, continues to be incredibly important now and through the rest of this century, so that we can get to our state's carbon neutral goal by 2045. So as I've said, our GHG performance and other metrics are actually provided to the Air Resources Board annually for their report to the legislature relative to cap and trade funding. And this chart is an illustration of just how influential the project is in terms of travel behavior, because it's not just a reflection of vehicle miles traveled reduction, but it's also a reflection of reducing the air market. I think we capture at minimum 30% of the air market, which is unique for any cap and trade project, and is a particular sector that's very difficult to decarbonize. On the next slide, as Advait mentioned, as a project that relies on electricity to deliver this transportation benefit, energy is a critical focus when it comes to sustainability. We want to be using our energy very efficiently, and that energy we use will be renewable. And what the team has done in terms of implementing our approach to renewable energy is examining a strategy where we can use the land that we've already purchased and introduce solar panels tied with battery storage that can serve as a means of reducing our operating expenses and provide some resilience for the program. So we'll be digging into that in much more detail. And on the next slide, I'd like to move over to Nagar, who's going to dig into, as much as we focus on the future and the influence that the system will have there, the construction practices we bring to bear now have been done intentionally to reduce the impact and protect our communities and construction. So Nagar.
Thank you, Meg. Yeah, to provide a little bit of background about the air quality in California, on the map on the right side, you can see the red and orange areas in Central Valley and Los Angeles that represent a unhealthy air quality, and it shows the air quality index for ozone and particulate matter. And the numbers associated with it shows how worse and how far it is from what is considered the standard and the good air quality. I have also chosen some air basins that shows a trend for unhealthy days in the past couple of years. And those are the air basins that our alignment is going through. And this is why important that we need to minimize our impact and not make the air quality worse than what it is. So in the next slide, I am proud to say that with the quarterly reports that we provide to the Air District, we were able to evaluate our performance, and we're able to reduce the criteria air pollutants about 50 to 65% lower than any typical fleet, and make our construction site cleaner than any other construction sites in the valley, and be able to protect the communities that are suffering from bad air quality. And not only reducing the pollutants, but also we're able to offset the amount of pollution that is going to the air, and assist the agriculture and bus schools, agriculture equipment and bus schools to improve their fleet. In the next slide, I want to tell you about the story behind this and how we were able to achieve this goal. Construction equipment is an important factor that contributes to air quality, and there is this term tier, and that relates to the standard and the technology that is used in engines of off-road vehicles. And we were able to require our contractors to use the best tier in their fleet. And the higher this number goes, it means the cleaner and better the engine is. So you can see the trend over time, and our contractors now have their more than 85% of their fleet comprised of Tier 4 engines. And not only their population is consists of high tiers, but also their usage is operating on high tiers in their fleet. And using these high tier engines in their fleet has enabled us to reduce significantly the amount of criteria air pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions that is producing in construction sites. I hope you enjoyed this part of the report. I'm going to give it back to Advait.
So on the next slide.
On the next slide, we see now we've covered the economic, the future energy and the climate related impacts. But what about here and now? We are doing a really big linear infrastructure project going across the Central Valley. We're talking about going through agricultural land and lots of natural areas as well. Well, I'm proud to say that we have preserved and or restored almost as much area, as much natural area as the authority is, as the rail line is going to go through. Similarly, on the agricultural land side as well, we've secured more than 1,250 acres of agricultural land, which will be protected and maintained. So the authority is careful to make sure that the intangible value and the tangible value that comes from the existing natural capital areas is protected as well.
Yes. Yep. So on the next slide, as Advait emphasized, our choices about construction activity and our choices on how to do mitigation, for example, being able to leverage the project's mitigation needs in order to secure actually larger parcels of lands that are connected to other habitats, continuously connected, means that you actually get a little bit better value out of some of the mitigation activities. And this is a reflection of the fact that we understand that science tells us we need to be doing as much as we can right now. And so to that end, we're not waiting for the future for the system to start looking at ways we can be delivering tangible benefits to the climate and to our natural resources. So this slide is a kind of summation of sort of what we have produced to date, which Meg, when she's not doing great presentations to our stakeholders, she's actively involved in meticulously checking the information that our contractors are providing us, and then translating that into what are the criteria air pollutants and the greenhouse gas emissions that have been produced. So you'll see that since the start of construction, we've produced about 29,000 metric tons of carbon. Now, on the positive balance side of the equation, we've also been working with partners, the Department of Conservation, CAL FIRE, and others to put into place permanent projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including urban tree planting in disadvantaged communities through our CAL FIRE partners, as well as Tree Fresno and the California Urban Forest Coalition, and then rural tree planting as well that helps to reforest burnt lands that then help to keep those lands from erosion. And then also looking at the habitat and the agricultural mitigation that's take place to date, we understand what the carbon benefit of that work is. And that is, as I mentioned, just a reflection of the fact that we want to be doing as much as we can now. This isn't the end point. This is just a snapshot of where we are today. And the team will continue to be working both to minimize what's happening on the one side of the graph and maximize the benefit on the other side of the graph. Our commitment to zero net air quality and greenhouse gas emissions in construction is unique for an infrastructure project at this scale. It's fairly rare globally. There have been a couple of projects in Canada where Advate's based that have required the contractors to offset emissions. And then elsewhere, projects like HS2 have now looked at the benefit or the sort of ethic of reducing greenhouse gas emissions before they start construction, because we recognize what needs to be done now. On the next slide, sustainable infrastructure, as I think you're sensing from our presentation today, is an incredibly broad category of activity, which means I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm thankful we'll have results later this year from a third-party validation exercise that helps us to understand our performance comprehensively. And as you can see, in addition to other topics, sustainable infrastructure focuses on the quality and safety of our work site, as well as how aggressively we're recycling. And as this illustrates, to date, we have achieved about 97% of the waste we have kept out of landfill and moved into the recycling stream. Things like steel and concrete that are commodities that can be taken back up in the construction stream very easily. But importantly, we also have taken a very close look at, we've done a vulnerability assessment and exposure analysis of the system, rather than exposure analysis. Now we're doing more granular vulnerability assessments to understand where the project might face some increased risk as a result of climate hazards. So all of this falls under the umbrella of sustainable infrastructure. And then we want to wrap up our presentation today on the next slide, talking just a little bit about station communities and ridership, because for many of us, this is really the best part of the system, because it's where the customers get on the train, which we are excited to drive towards. These stations can and are intended to serve as bridges within their communities and to correct some past imbalances where infrastructure might have separated communities. We take that intention very seriously and implement it through our station area and station site planning work specifically. These are some illustrations of, on the left, the canopy that is still kind of in a bit of design evolution, but it'll be protecting our customers on the platforms. I'm sure anyone who is listening in from the Central Valley recognizes we want to be protecting people from the sun and the heat there, but as well as folks from the cold as we move into winter. And then on the right, you'll see we're starting to look at the entirety of our station site and understand how it serves as a means of catalyzing development in these areas. So on the next slide, I think when it comes to riders, we are incredibly greedy. We want as many people as possible, millions of customers living and working within a mile of the station, in that immediate station area, which you see on this transect. You know, this is the area, this is the way the system can help to reinforce compact growth patterns that are centered in our existing urban areas, which helps then to minimize the development pressure on the agricultural and natural and working lands that are vital to the state's economy and our environmental health. And I think as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, you know, the administration has been very active when it comes to enacting executive orders relative to climate work. And I think the 2 weeks ago, Executive Order N8220, which focused on natural and working lands, really illustrated how land use is a critical area of focus for climate work. So the more we can do to get development in the station areas, the more we can do to protect through partnerships these other areas as well. And on our final slide, just coming back to that topic of community resilience, I think on the next slide. Just maybe digging into this concept a little bit more, the authorities provided funding to station communities to revise the local land use and zoning plans so that they can take best advantage of this station, and also to create a vision for how the high-speed rail investment can really revitalize these areas and existing centers. We also have planning work underway in our station cities, across all of our station cities, from San Francisco all the way through Los Angeles. But notably, to date, the cities of Fresno, Bakersfield, the Tulare County Association of Governments, and Palmdale have actually completed station area work with plans that emphasize how the station can create these hubs of activity in the city centers and adjust their sort of underlying zoning codes to enable that visionary development to take place. We recognize that in many of these markets, most of these station cities these markets are not yet poised to implement the type of development that best takes advantage of or feeds our rail investment with the riders that we want to see. So we've been working with our city partners and other rail partners to explore tools that fill that investment gap, or that can capture the new value created by the rail service to further development and investment. And this is important because station delivery should positively influence not just infill development in the station districts in general, but also to provide our sort of much needed affordable housing as well. And through our partnerships, and specifically, we want to be advancing the design of our facilities and the layout of the station so that they can best help realize the state's vision for inclusive city building in these areas. So our vision is not only for stations that provide an attractive entry point for journeys throughout the state, but are destinations in their own right that can catalyze activity in these revitalized city centers. And as we noted, bring these cities closer together so that there's a greater range of economic activity for the communities in these areas. On the final slide, I think this is the point at which we want to thank you tremendously for listening in as we've kind of done a light touch across a couple of key points for the sustainability report. And then I think we'd like to dive into some questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, all three of you. What a educational, exciting. I love to hear, like I said earlier, anything about our sustainability program. It's exciting to see the numbers, the outcomes. But I'm wondering, as wonderful as those numbers are, and they really are, they're meaningful, but how does that rank in terms of industry standards? Are we having an impact about how contractors are delivering projects, green projects, like what I would consider ours to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll provide a little bit of what I've been seeing or hearing from my peers at other organizations, and Advi can chime in as well, since he also has a broad view across many different projects globally. You know, as Neg was focusing on, you know, our requirement for tier 4 vehicles is in tune with and helping other agencies and other municipalities to recognize that emphasis on cleaner construction equipment has a very tangible value. And so we're seeing a lot of municipalities starting to require tier 4 vehicles for their construction activities. And that will have the benefit of really transforming the fleets that are available in the state of California for construction. So you're starting to see that fleet turnover to cleaner vehicles. As well, we hired 25% of the on-road fleet for the next major construction set to be a zero emissions vehicle, which means, you know, we could have people, you know, driving up and down the construction site in maybe in Teslas, but more likely in sort of the new zero emissions vehicles, sort of light duty, medium duty trucks that are coming online as well. And that's, you know, crucial for, again, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and air quality emissions from construction. So you are starting to see projects do that. And then, you know, we certainly coordinate and collaborate with other projects globally. And we're starting to see, as I mentioned, this kind of greater focus on, oh, you know, let's do a tree planting program or do an investment in a disadvantaged communities so that you're seeing some of that early benefit from the project and then move into construction, because you know, folks are just recognizing the value of some of these approaches.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions coming in, and as a reminder, folks, oh, sorry about that. My light went off because I was just sitting here for too long. A reminder, if you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll see if we can get to the questions. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that come in. They are about stations, and especially at the end, and these questions came in a little bit early before you got to that section, but I still think they're worth asking about what are we doing specifically to ensure that we're getting the most out of our station sites, specifically those that businesses and residents that live close to that. Are we, specifically part of one of the questions, are we purchasing land plots around those stations now? Are we doing that type of advanced preparation and planning for our stations?
Great question. So we have done the majority of the right-of-way purchase for the Fresno site. And so the team is very focused on how to maximize the use of all of those parcels, not just for kind of functional requirements for the system, but also understand how we could use some of those parcels in advance of service to serve the community in some way, you know, program it for activities, program it for food trucks. That actually comes up in Fresno a lot. They're a great food city. And so we hear that a lot. But we also hear things like, you know, can we use the site for art activities or other kind of events and activities? We also see the advantage of using some of those sites as observation for the delivery and testing and commissioning, you know, not the site where the active construction is, but slightly off of it. Use it so that people can observe what's happening in testing and commissioning of the train. People call that sort of construction is theater, or kind of the construction spectacle. But, you know, this is the first place that we'll be testing high-speed rail trains in the US. And so it will invite a lot of attention and activity. So we want to be thoughtful about how we organize the site so that that can take place. In places like, so in Fresno, we've completed a lot of the right-of-way purchase. We, you know, want to be, we'll be moving into more right-of-way activity once we have some of the board decisions around the expansion of the system into and down to Bakersfield.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
So we have another question. Well, we've got a few coming through. So this one, I think, changes things up a little bit. You've mentioned sustainability and construction, but are you proposing, but what are you proposing for maintenance? Are there any innovations, you are employing to ensure sustainability in that space?
Right. Great question. Yeah, I think we tend to focus on what's right in front of us, which is the construction activity, and it's also huge. But we also, the team has focused on a couple of critical maintenance activities. You know, at a very high level, we've set some high level objectives around zero emissions operations and low emissions operations, which does translate into maintenance activities that rely on equipment that is electric or, you know, has sort of control measures in place to reduce emissions as well. We also do a lot of requiring of monitoring and reporting. I know that is super nerdy, but that is, if you don't know what's happening, you can't actually control or manage it. And so we have required contractors who will be coming in to do maintenance activities to both monitor and track performance around water, stormwater, and energy and emissions, and then report that to the authority, and then take corrective action if they're seeing any dips in that behavior. You know, I think we're also looking at all of the facilities on the system are required to be zero net energy and achieve other very important high performance targets as well, including our heavy maintenance facilities and light maintenance facilities. And so that drives the folks who are delivering those facilities to make choices around the quality of what they're putting in place, and then to also think strategically about how they handle the natural resources within and around the site as well.
Thanks. Yeah. So this question, I'm going to preface it with something that I've seen, and that is that Governor Schwarzenegger, Governor Brown, and now obviously Governor Newsom, very aggressive at addressing the climate crisis here in California. And I think we're seen often as an international leader, even though we're a state within the United States. But I would say that we have leadership that really goes forward thinking here. And so to that end, the question is about new legislation or executive orders that have come out of late, pushing us more towards an attack towards the climate action. So I know there's been a few executive orders that have come through. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how are those affecting our program, and then if so, how are we implementing them? How are we addressing them?
Right. So, you know, Governor Brown had his executive order on climate adaptation, which we were really excited to see because the team had been working very hard to have a climate adaptation sort of cross-functional group of folks meeting in the authority to be looking at our practices and making sure we were meeting them. Governor Newsom, of course, followed up with N1919 last year around climate adaptation, and multiple agencies focused on what they could be doing to achieve these reduced climate goals. And then much more aggressively, just back in September, Executive Order N7920 was focused on heavy duty zero emissions vehicles. And Nagar has gotten the fantastic assignment of both looking at, you know, the existing availability. As I mentioned, we'd already required our contractor fleets to have 25% zero emissions of vehicles for on-road. But what's exciting about the recent executive orders is that that's a very strong market signal, as well as the regulatory action of ARB. It's a really strong market signal around the heavier duty sector, which can only then, you know, we can use that to our benefit on the project as well to kind of match that policy move with a requirement in construction to use these types of equipment. So that's part of what NEG is tackling over the next couple of years, is making sure we've got all of the ducks in a row to be incorporating these types of new zero emissions vehicles on site. And then the recent land use executive order, I think that opens up a really interesting opportunity to think at a very regional scale around agricultural and other mitigation activities. And I know we are talking to a couple of partners and want to continue that work to think about how do we leverage the project to then achieve this greater goal of 30% conservation of land for the state.
Wow, great, impressive stuff. So I have one question that's quick that I can answer, and it was about where can we find the report, the full report, and that's on our website, hsr.ca.gov. There's a link to the sustainability report right at the very top of our main page. So if you want to look at the full report, please go there. We would love to share it with you. So, so next question, and this is pretty technical, so we'll see how we're able to handle this. Will development of solar battery storage to support the need for the electricity go through a procurement process? And are there any preliminary timelines for phase of that project?
Yes, we do have to procure the solar and storage. I would say that the timeline of that is linked very closely to the timeline of testing the system and putting the electrical system in place. But you know, we're the state of California, so we early and often will be communicating about the nature of these procurements as soon as we have, you know, kind of finalized decision making on some of that timing.
Okay. Okay, so next question. In such a hot climate, how will the battery life of battery storage be managed effectively? And what measures are in place to prevent batteries from failing?
Oh, great question. You know, I think that is a question that's kind of dived right to the heart of some of the analysis that the team is doing, and they have brought up, you know, there's they've been studying pretty closely two phenomenon. One, the sort of really depressing phenomenon that we all have lived through this summer relative to smoke in the atmosphere. But at the same time, you know, the battery storage, I think they are factoring in the fact that, you know, these batteries are located in a specific physical place. And one of the things the team has done across the board in their analysis, you know, we use not just historic data relative to weather, but also future forecasts relative to temperature to analyze our facilities. We want to make sure that, you know, things that we put in place that will have a very long life can withstand the types of temperatures you're going to be seeing over the next 30 years. So that's a general answer to your question. Yes, we are thinking about it, but I don't have specific information to hand, but
yeah, I figured that might be the case. Okay, so this question came through too, and it's kind of combining with another one here. But what are long-term goals to connect disadvantaged communities to get from A to B to particular stations so it's affordable to commute every day?
That is a great question. So some of that the authority can focus on and control. And then some of it we rely on our local partners who are the providers of local transit. And you know, the philosophy of the state is that the stations should be seamless multimodal hubs. So we should have a very clear connection between the rail facility and existing rail and bus and micro mobility as well. So bikes and scooters and TNCs. So you know, the intention is to spatially connect all of those and do that both an integrated sort of payment idea, which Caltrans has been working on, the ITIP program, and then also focus on this idea of very carefully timed and sequenced schedules so that you know that, you know, you come to a bus stop, you'll only need to wait 15 minutes. That bus will go to another place, which is timed to take you on the train. So it's all about kind of a coordination of partners and timing, and then an integration of payment, which does include understanding what can be done for folks who may not have credit cards or, you know, have access to don't have access to the same type of financial instruments. But then in terms of disadvantaged communities in the immediate station area, you know, through our partnerships with the local jurisdictions around station area planning, a lot of that focus has been on, okay, how do we make this you know, what are the tools and instruments the cities can bring to bear around anti-displacement and other policies that are helpful for those communities? But then what are the interventions we can do to make these more walkable, bikeable, safe neighborhoods so that, you do have a kind of station district that is highly multimodal and safe.
Makes sense.
Sure.
Thank you. So this one, and it's, well, let's see if we can get to specifics, but it's a very general question about the cost. What is the cost of implementation of these sustainability requirements? And like I said, I don't know that you're gonna be able to give us a dollar value, but just kind of what are the implications there when you start thinking about cost?
Oh, that's a great question. The team does, when we think about new sustainability strategies, we do actually think about it from a life cycle cost perspective. So it's definitely appreciating, okay, if we have a zero net energy facility, you know, what are the strategies to achieve that and how do they perform over the life cycle of that facility? We've also looked at, you know, in terms of straight up cost, this has been how the project has been delivered since 2015. And so, you know, before we decided to take this approach, we looked at, you know, we would need to be doing, if you were taking something to a landfill, you have to pay a landfill fee. And so rather than that, we focused on recycling so that you're A, avoiding the landfill fees, and B, focusing on activities that would reinforce the recycling economy. You know, either way, the contractor had to demolish a building. It's just about where they take that waste. I think the other area where we you know, thought very carefully about cost considerations was, you know, environmental product declarations. And at the time, they were something that were very familiar to the building industry, but not necessarily to the civil infrastructure space. But they're a very minor cost. It's probably $30,000 to do an environmental product declaration for a material, and that kind of weighed against having the transparency about the materials. We thought was certainly an important investment to make. You know, tier 4 vehicles, Nagar has been digging into some of the cost data relative to that. And again, there's a capital cost, and I'd love it if she wants to provide any of the highlights from what she's seen to date. It's actually quite interesting looking at some of those costs, but we again thought about it in kind of a broader life cycle context. It was important. We've committed to offsetting emissions. And so either you're paying for the offset program, or you might pay a little bit more for a cleaner vehicle to never then emit that criteria air pollutant. And so we've actually taken a kind of life cycle cost perspective on looking at that. And doing that math, you come out to, yeah, let's not pollute in the first place. And I wonder, Neg, if there's anything you'd seen from the analysis of equipment.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add that such as so many other things, we're at the beginning where the tier 4 equipment were introduced to the market. It was a challenge because there was a definitely cost difference. But now over time, you can see that the market availability is pretty good. And there are thousands of tier 4 engines out there, and it is definitely not that big of a cost difference for contractors to comply with their requirements. And it's a easier, you know, market to target and get the tier 4 engines and use them in your fleet.
Okay, I didn't think that was going to be our last question, but in fact, we're right up against noon. So unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but the questions that have been registered, if you registered with an email address, we'll be able to respond to you directly. If you registered anonymously, I would recommend, if you want answers, we'd love to get them for you. If you go to our website, hsr.ca.gov, you can click on the contact us, and there's a way to send messages, and our communications team will receive that, and we'll be able to get answers for you. So please feel free to use that feature. We'd love to get you answers to any of your questions. Again, the report can also be found there, fact sheets, information about all of our programs, including the sustainability program, on that website. So if you feel free to go there. Also to follow us on social media. You can get links there to all of our channels. We'd love for you to stay informed and hear about the next webinar when that comes through. So stay connected with us. And I want to thank Meg, Gar, Advi, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing this with us today. I think it was very informative and hopefully our audience found it helpful. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.